The shuttle door hissed open onto a wind that smelled of wet stone and warm grass. Daniel Hart stepped down with a small rucksack slung over one shoulder and his coat folded over his arm. He paused for a moment at the bottom of the ramp, just to feel the gravity. It was lighter than Earth, heavier than the orbital stations he had been living on for the past 4 months. His boots sank a little into the soft red soil of Vera 9. A tall figure waited for him near the landing pad. The saurian was nearly 7 feet of green-gray scale and leather harness, with a long snout and clever yellow eyes. The name patch on the harness read Ruskar. He looked Daniel up and down, then huffed through his nostrils in a way that needed no translator. "You are the human they sent," Ruskar said. His voice was deep and slow. "I expected someone larger." Daniel offered a small smile. Most people do. He shouldered the rucksack and waited. He did not argue, he did not boast. He just waited the way a man waits for a bus. Ruskar turned and walked toward the sanctuary buildings without another word. Daniel followed at an easy pace. The sanctuary spread across a long green valley between two low mountains. Round stone halls rose from the grass, their roofs covered in moss. Saurian wardens moved between the buildings carrying buckets, tools, and bundles of dried meat. A pair of grown dragons rested on a sunny ridge in the distance, their scales catching the light like bronze coins. Daniel paused to look at them for a moment, his face soft. "They are sleeping," Ruskar said over his shoulder. "Do not stare too long, it is rude among our kind." "Sorry," Daniel said, and turned his eyes back to the path. They walked past a long hall where young saurians were being trained with practice spears. The warden stopped to look at Daniel as he passed. A few snorted. One younger one made a small laughing sound that the translator decided not to translate. Daniel only nodded politely to each of them and kept walking. Ruskar led him through a low arched door into a quieter building. The air inside was warm and smelled of straw and milk. A single long room stretched ahead, lined with shallow nests of soft cloth. In two of the nests, two small shapes were curled up tightly. "This is the nursery," Ruskar said. "You will care for these two. They are too young for the main pens. You will feed them, clean them, and keep them warm. That is all. You will not train them. You will not name them differently than we have. You will not take them outside without a warden." "Understood," Daniel said. "Their names are Sela and Torin. Sela is the silver one. Torin is the bronze one. They were hatched 11 days ago. Their mother was lost in a storm." Daniel's eyes softened at that, but he said nothing. Ruskar watched him for a long moment. "You do not seem like a soldier." "I'm not anymore," Daniel said. "Your file says you were." "My file says a lot of things." Ruskar tilted his head. He did not press further, he simply gestured to the nests. "Go on then, they have not eaten since dawn." Daniel set down his rucksack against the wall, hung his coat on a wooden peg and rolled up his sleeves. He walked slowly to the nests, keeping his steps soft. He knelt beside the silver one first. Sela was no bigger than a house cat. Her scales shimmered like polished metal. She opened one tired eye, looked at him, and let out a small, confused chirp. Daniel held out the back of his hand, the way one offers a hand to a strange dog. Sela sniffed him. Her tongue, thin and pale pink, flicked once against his knuckles. Then she made a tiny pleased sound and pushed her head against his palm. Behind him, Ruskar made a small surprised noise in his throat. Daniel moved to the bronze nest next. Torin was a little larger and a little bolder. He climbed straight up Daniel's arm and settled on his shoulder, gripping the cloth of his shirt with small, careful claws. He sniffed Daniel's ear, sneezed, and then made himself comfortable. "Hello, you two," Daniel whispered. Ruskar stood in the doorway, watching this stranger with two of the rarest creatures in the sector draped over him like he had carried them since birth. He had seen seasoned saurian handlers wait weeks to earn that kind of trust. He had seen some never earn it at all. A keeper named Veli came in with a warm bottle and stopped short when she saw the scene. She looked at Ruskar. Ruskar lifted one clawed hand in a small gesture that meant, "Do not disturb." Daniel took the bottle from Veli with a quiet thank you. He sat down on the floor between the two nests, leaned his back against the warm stone wall, and let Torin slide down into his lap. Sela padded over on tiny feet and pressed herself against his thigh. He fed Torin first, then Sela, holding the bottle with the patient steadiness of a man who had once held more dangerous things. When both bellies were full, the dragon bobbies yawned wide pink yawns and climbed onto him without asking. Sela tucked herself under his chin. Torin draped his small bronze tail across Daniel's wrist. Within minutes, both of them were asleep. Daniel did not move. He barely breathed. He just sat there in the warm quiet of the nursery with two sleeping hatchlings curled against his chest. His eyes drifted shut, but not all the way. They never did all the way. In the doorway, Ruskar slowly stepped back and pulled the door closed without a sound. Rain tapped gently against the moss roof of the nursery on the fourth morning. Inside, two small dragons were trying very hard to climb a sleeping human. Sela had made it as far as Daniel's chest. She was now flapping her tiny silver wings in slow, proud motions, as if she had conquered a great mountain. Torin, less patient, had taken the shortcut and crawled directly over Daniel's face. His bronze tail was draped across Daniel's nose. His back claws were carefully, gently kneading Daniel's forehead. Daniel opened one eye, then the other. He did not move. "Good morning," he whispered. Torin chirped right into his ear. A soft snort came from the doorway. Veli, the young Saurian keeper, was leaning against the frame with a basket of warm fish in her arms. She had been watching for a while. "They have decided you belong to them," she said. Her translator made the words sound flat, but her yellow eyes were amused. "I noticed," Daniel said. He sat up slowly, careful not to drop either dragon. Sela slid down into his lap with a small chirp of protest. Torin simply moved to his shoulder and stayed there as if it were a throne. Veli set down the basket and crouched by the nests. "In our tradition, when a hatchling chooses, it cannot be changed. Not by the council, not by the keepers, not even by the parents if the parents still lived." "I am only here for a few seasons," Daniel said gently. Veli did not answer that. She just looked at him for a moment, then began to lay out the morning fish. The days fell into a pattern after that. Daniel woke before the sun. He fed the hatchlings, cleaned the nest cloth, and carried both of them in a soft sling across his chest while he did the chores around the building. Sela liked to sleep against his heart. Torin liked to watch everything with his small, round eyes, head turning at every new sound. The Saurian wardens watched too. At first they laughed quietly when they saw the small human walking around with two dragons strapped to him like infants. Then they stopped laughing. They started nodding. By the end of the first week, when Daniel passed through the main hall, the wardens lowered their heads slightly in greeting, and Daniel returned the gesture without ever making it strange. Only one warden did not soften. His name was Drac, and he was younger than Ruskar, broader in the chest, sharper in the tongue. He had wanted the nursery post for himself. He believed dragons should be raised by dragonkin, not by soft outsiders with no claws and no fire. He made his feelings known by leaving fish heads where Daniel would step on them, and by speaking loudly about the smell of humans whenever Daniel was nearby. Daniel never reacted. He cleaned up the fish heads, he nodded politely, he kept walking. This patience seemed to bother Drac more than any argument would have. On the 9th evening, Ruskar came to the nursery at dusk. The hatchlings were asleep in their nests for once, full of milk and small bits of soft meat. Daniel was sitting on the floor with his back against the wall, sharpening a small folding knife with slow, careful strokes. The motion was so smooth and so quiet that Ruskar paused in the doorway. The way Daniel held the knife was not the way a farmer held a knife. It was not the way a keeper held a knife. It was the way a hand held a tool it had used 1,000 times in places where the air was thin and the light was bad. Ruskar cleared his throat. Daniel looked up and smiled, and the look was gone. "Tea," Daniel offered, gesturing to a small pot warming on a stone. Ruskar accepted. He folded his long legs and sat across from the human. For a while, neither of them spoke. The rain had stopped. Outside, the evening insects were starting their slow song. "You sleep with one eye open," Ruskar said at last. "Old habit. From the war." Daniel poured the tea into 2 small clay cups. He handed one across. "From before the war and during it and after." "There is an after." "There is always an after," Daniel said. "That is the whole point of stopping." Ruskar held the cup in his clawed hand. The steam curled up between them. "Your file is sealed," Ruskar said. "I tried to read it yesterday. The Conquered denied my access 3 times." "I know. That tells me more than the file would have." Daniel smiled into his cup. He did not deny it. Ruskar took a slow sip. The tea was bitter and warm and strange to him. He liked it. "There are stories among the older Saurians," he said, "about a war on the Rim 20 cycles ago, about a unit that humanity sent in when nothing else worked. They did not wear flags. They did not take prisoners they were not told to take. They came and they went, and the worlds they walked across stopped burning." Daniel sipped his tea. "They had a name for the unit," Ruskar said. "They had several," Daniel said softly. "None of them were kind." Ruskar was quiet for a long moment. Then he looked at the 2 sleeping hatchlings in their nests. "And now you feed bobbies." "Now I feed bobbies," Daniel agreed. Ruskar nodded slowly. He set down the empty cup, rose to his full height, and walked to the door. There he paused. "If anything ever comes for them," he said, without turning around, "I would like to be standing behind you." Daniel did not look up from his tea. "Stand wherever you like, friend," he said. "Just keep your head down." High above Vera 9, far past the moon's thin ring of orbital lights, a black ship drifted with its engines cold. It had been drifting there for 2 days. The defense grid had not seen it. The grid was old, built to spot crude pirate sloops and rusted scavengers. This ship was neither. Its hull drank radar. Its crew drank stronger things. Inside the bridge, a tall figure in a patched leather coat leaned over a glowing map. His name was Captain Voron, and he led the Voss Reavers. He had the build of a runner and the eyes of a man who slept very little. On the map, 2 small marks pulsed gently inside a soft green square. 2 hatchlings, rare ones, worth more than his ship, his crew, and his last 6 raids combined. "Easy world," his second whispered beside him. "Lizards and farmers, 1 human caretaker, old man, bottom of the duty list." Voron smiled. "Then we go in tonight." Down on the surface, Daniel was teaching Torin how not to set the curtains on fire. It was not going well. The bronze hatchling had discovered 3 days ago that he could produce a small puff of warm smoke from his nostrils. He had been very proud of this. Today, the smoke had become a tiny orange spark. Torin was beside himself with joy. He kept trying to show Daniel. Daniel kept gently turning his small head away from anything flammable. "Not the basket," Daniel said softly. "Not the curtain, not Sela." Sela, who had been napping on the windowsill, opened one eye and made a small offended noise at the suggestion. "Sorry," Daniel told her. Veli came in laughing. She had heard the last part from outside. "He is early. Most bronzes do not spark until the 2nd month." "He is showing off," Daniel said. "He is showing off for you," Veli corrected. She set down a fresh basket of fish. "Sela too. She tried to fly to the rafter this morning when you were not looking. She wanted to surprise you when you came back." Daniel looked down at the small silver dragon on the windowsill. Sela quickly pretended she had not heard. "Tell her I am very surprised," Daniel said. Veli grinned, showing her short white teeth. The day passed slowly. Daniel walked the hatchlings out to the small grass yard behind the nursery and let them tumble in the warm afternoon light. Torin chased his own tail. Sela tried to catch a small flying insect and bumped her nose on a rock. Daniel sat on a low stone and watched them with the patient half-smile of a man who had not had much to watch over in a long time. Drac passed by the fence. He saw the scene. He spat once on the ground and walked on. Daniel did not look up. By evening the sky over Vera 9 had turned a deep purple. Two pale moons rose at opposite ends of the horizon. The hatchlings were full and sleepy. Daniel carried them back inside, tucked them into the warm nest cloth, and sat down beside them with his back against the wall, as he did every night. He was almost asleep when the lights flickered. Just once, just for half a heartbeat. His eyes were open before the flicker had finished. He stayed perfectly still for a long moment, listening. The nursery was quiet. The hatchlings breathed softly. Outside, the night insects had stopped singing. That was the part that made him stand up. Insects do not stop singing for nothing. He walked to the small window and looked up. The stars were where they were supposed to be. The pale moons too. But high above, near the second moon, a single point of light moved in a way stars do not move. It crossed two constellations in 3 breaths and then went dark again, the way a ship goes dark when its crew remembers to kill the running lights. Daniel watched the spot where it had been for another moment. Then he turned away from the window. In the main hall, the alarm finally began to sound. Late, too late. Wardens shouted in the corridors. Doors slammed. Boots ran on stone. Veli burst into the nursery, eyes wide, a small spear in her hand. Ships, she gasped. 3 of them. The grid did not see them until they were inside the air. They are landing at the South Pens. Reavers, Ruskar thinks. He says to keep the bobbies hidden. He says to bar the door. He says he is coming. Daniel was already moving, but he was not moving toward the door. He was kneeling by the nests. Sela stirred at the sound of his voice. She blinked up at him, sleepy and confused. He stroked one finger along her silver brow until her eyes drifted closed again. He did the same to Torin, who muttered a tiny chirp and tucked his bronze tail closer. Daniel took off his coat, the worn brown one he had worn since the day he arrived, and laid it over both hatchlings like a soft brown sky. He tucked the edges around them with hands that did not shake. "Sleep you too," he whispered. "Just a little longer, I'll be right back." He stood, he turned to Veli. "Bar this door behind me," he said. His voice was the same gentle voice he had used to teach Torin about curtains. "Do not open it for anyone, not even me unless I say the word T. Do you understand?" Veli nodded, frightened. Daniel walked past her out of the nursery down the corridor to a small locked storage room at the end. He pressed his palm to the lock. A soft chime answered. The door slid open. Inside was a single long crate marked only with his name. He had not opened it in 11 years. He opened it now. Behind him, Ruskar appeared at the end of the corridor, breathing hard. He saw the open crate. He saw what was inside. His mouth opened slightly and stayed open. 23 reavers came down the main path from the South Pens. They walked in a loose formation, the way men walk when they expect no fight. Their armor was a patchwork of stolen pieces. Their rifles were bright and oiled. They were laughing about something one of them had said about a Saurian farmer's mate. The lead reaver, a wide man named Breck, raised a fist and the column stopped at the edge of the courtyard. Lights from the sanctuary halls spilled out across the stones. Somewhere a Saurian was crying. Somewhere else, an alarm was still trying to do its job too late. Breck grinned under his helmet. Easy night. He stepped into the courtyard. A single figure stood on the far side, in the soft pool of light from the nursery doorway. He was not tall. He was not armored. He wore a plain dark shirt with the sleeves rolled up, plain dark trousers, and plain dark boots. His arms hung at his sides. He looked from across the courtyard, almost embarrassed to be in the way. Breck laughed out loud. "Is that him, the caretaker, the old man?" "That is him," his second confirmed, reading from a small screen. "Daniel Hart, 61 cycles, civilian post, no combat record on file." "No combat record," Breck repeated, grinning. "Walk away, old man, we only want the bobbies." The man in the courtyard tilted his head slightly. His voice carried across the stones, soft and almost kind. "Please leave," he said. "The bobbies are sleeping, you'll wake them." For a moment the reavers actually stopped. The words were so calm, so gentle, that two of them looked at each other with confused little smirks. Then Breck laughed again, raised his rifle and fired. The shot went exactly where Daniel had been standing. Daniel was no longer there. In the security room at the back of the main hall, Ruskar stood frozen in front of the screens. Veli was beside him, gripping his arm. The feeds from the courtyard cameras showed 12 angles. 11 of them showed reavers. One of them, the one nearest the nursery, showed nothing but an empty pool of light. "Where," Veli whispered, "did he go?" Ruskar did not answer. He had served on 3 frontier worlds. He had seen conquered Marines. He had seen hegemony elite. He had never seen a human simply not be there. On the largest screen, a reaver near the back of the column suddenly fell forward without a sound. The man beside him turned, confused, and then his rifle was no longer in his hands. It was in someone else's hands. It fired once, very precisely, into the man's shoulder plate where the armor did not quite meet. He went down too. Then the lights in the courtyard went out. There was no scream. There was no battle cry. There was only the sound of boots on stone, calm and unhurried, and the dull, soft thuds of bodies being eased to the ground so they would not clatter and wake anything sleeping nearby. Breck shouted. He fired wildly into the dark. Muzzle flashes lit the courtyard in stuttering flashes. In each flash, a different image was burned into the cameras. A reaver clutching his throat, another stumbling sideways, another already on his knees. And in the center of every flash, somewhere different each time, a small dark figure moving the way water moves through a drain. In the security room, Veli stopped breathing. Ruskar slowly sat down in the warden's chair. "Read the file," he said quietly. "What?" "His file, try again right now." Veli scrambled to the console. She entered Daniel's name. The system thought for a moment and then, this time, it opened. The first line read, "Hart, Daniel J. Unit Designation, GHOSTWRK 7. The second line read, "Kill confirmed ENGAGMENTS, individual, 1214. Note lower bound only." The third line read, "BY decision of the Conquered War Tribunal, further field deployment is prohibited. Unit members permitted only non-combat posts by their own selection." Veli stared. Ruskar covered his eyes with one clawed hand. "Ghost work," he whispered. "Stars above, they sent us a ghost work." Out in the courtyard, Breck was now alone. He stood in the dark with his rifle shaking in his hands, turning slowly. His men were down all around him. None of them were moving. None of them were dead, he realized slowly. They were breathing. Every one of them, just very neatly, very precisely, taken out of the fight without being killed. That was somehow worse. "Come out," Breck shouted. "Come out and face me." A soft voice answered from behind him, closer than it should have been. "I'm here." Breck spun, his rifle came up. A gentle hand closed on the barrel and pushed it down. Another gentle hand took the rifle out of his grip the way a parent takes a sharp toy from a child. Daniel stood in front of him, close enough that Breck could see the small, worry line between his brows. "You shouldn't have come for the bobbies," Daniel said. Breck swung a fist. Daniel caught it without seeming to move. He held the fist there for a moment, the way one holds a fluttering bird, and then he gently set Breck down on the ground in the recovery position, the way medics did. Breck's eyes rolled back. He was out before his head touched the stone. Daniel stood up straight. He looked around the courtyard. He counted 23, all down, all breathing. He took a long breath. He let it out. Then he turned and walked, calm and quiet, back toward the nursery, where two small dragons were still sleeping peacefully under a worn brown coat, unaware that the world had nearly ended for them and had not. Dawn over Vira 9 came in soft pinks and pale gold. The two moons faded into the brightening sky. Steam rose from the wet grass of the courtyard, where Saurian wardens were now moving carefully among the bound forms of 23 unconscious reavers, checking pulses, removing weapons, and shaking their heads in quiet wonder. A small medical team from the orbital station had already landed. They had expected to treat dead bodies and grieving keepers. Instead, they were treating mild concussions and pressure point bruises. One of the medics, a thin, conquered officer with neat gray feathers along her arms, kept stopping in the middle of her work to look around the courtyard as if she could not quite believe what she was seeing. She finally walked over to Ruskar, who was standing by the nursery door. 23 armed reavers, she said, and not one of them is dead. That is correct, Ruskar said. Who did this? Ruskar nodded toward the nursery, the caretaker. The medic stared at him for a long moment. Then she looked at the door, then back at him. She opened her beak to say something, closed it, and walked away without saying anything at all. Inside the nursery, Daniel was kneeling by the nests. The worn brown coat still covered the two hatchlings. He gently lifted one edge. Sela was curled in a tight silver knot, one wing folded neatly over her eyes against the morning light. Torin had ended up on his back at some point in the night, all four legs in the air, his bronze belly rising and falling in slow content breaths. Neither of them stirred when Daniel touched them. A small cut had opened on his left cheek at some point in the courtyard. He had not noticed it until now. He wiped it on the back of his wrist, and the blood was already half dry. He smiled down at the bobbies. You two slept through all of it, he whispered. Good, stay that way for a while longer. The door creaked. Ruskar stepped in, ducking slightly under the low frame, followed by Veli. Veli's eyes were red. She had been crying at some point in the night, though it was not clear whether from fear or relief. Daniel rose slowly to meet them. He looked tired now, in a way he had not looked the night before. The way a man looks tired when a long-locked door inside him has been opened and closed again, and the lock is still warm. Ruskar held a small data slate in his clawed hand. The screen was still glowing with 3 short lines of text. I read your file, he said. I assumed you would, Daniel said quietly. Ghostwork 7. Daniel did not answer. There were 7 units, Ruskar asked. There were 7 once. And now? Now there are 4 of us still alive. 2 are on a farm on Earth. 1 runs a bakery on a station near Mars. 1 feeds baby dragons on a moon called Vera 9. Ruskar lowered the slate slowly. His yellow eyes were soft. Why, he said, why this post? With your record, the Conquered would have given you any quiet world you wanted. A house by a sea, a library, a garden. Why a nursery on a frontier moon with a defense grid old enough to be your grandmother? Daniel was quiet for a moment. He looked down at the 2 sleeping shapes under the coat. Because the bobbies do not know, he said. They do not know what I was. They do not know the numbers in that file. They do not know the names of the worlds I walked through. They look at me and they see warm hands and a soft voice in someone who comes when they cry. That is all I am to them. And when I am with them, that is almost all I am to me. Veli wiped her eyes with the back of her wrist. Ruskar bowed his great horned head. He did not say anything for a long time. There will be a hearing, he said finally. The Conquered will want to know how a sealed record human was caring for 2 of the rarest hatchlings in the sector. There will be politicians. There will be cameras. There will be those who say humans cannot be trusted with such a post. I know, Daniel said. What should we tell them? Daniel looked at him. Tell them the truth, he said. Tell them I asked for the post. Tell them I will leave the day either of these two no longer wants me here. Tell them that is the only deal I have ever needed. Ruskar straightened. I will tell them more than that, he said. I will tell them that the Council of Vira 9 has, by ancient right of the Keepers, recognized a new bond. The hatchlings have chosen you. By our oldest law, the chosen one is family. The hearing can argue with the conquered. They cannot argue with our law. Daniel blinked. He had not expected that. You don't have to do that, he said softly. I know I do not have to, Ruskar said. I am doing it anyway. He stepped forward. He placed one large clawed hand very gently on Daniel's shoulder. The gesture was a saurian one. It meant brother in the old sense, the sense that did not need blood. Daniel held very still. Then slowly, he reached up and placed his small human hand over Ruskar's. Behind them, under the worn brown coat, Sela stretched out one tiny silver leg in her sleep. Torin made a small content sound that was almost, but not quite, a snore. The two dragon bobbies slept on, peaceful in the morning light, never knowing that an entire war had been silently fought and won in the dark outside their door, by the same warm hands that had fed them their breakfast the day before, and would feed them their breakfast again in just a little while. News of the night on Vira 9 traveled faster than the medical reports. By the time the sun rose over the conquered capital, 3 news channels were already running the same blurry security still on a loop. A small human in a plain dark shirt standing in a courtyard of fallen reavers. 23 of the worst raiders on the rim, all alive, all bound, none of them able to say much that made sense in the hours afterward. The Saurian High Council convened a private session the same day. 2 senior members demanded answers from the conquered ambassador in person. Why had humanity placed a ghostwork operative inside a sanctuary nursery without disclosure? What other operatives walked among them disguised as caretakers, cooks, gardeners? The ambassador, a quiet woman named Myra Halden, stood before the council with her hands folded in front of her and listened to every question without flinching. When they were done, she answered with a calm that the chamber would talk about for years afterward. Daniel Hart was not placed there by humanity, she said. He requested the post himself, the way every retired member of his unit is permitted to do. By treaty signed in your own grandfather's time, members of that unit choose their own quiet. We do not assign it. We do not deny it. We do not announce it. If he had asked to bake bread on a Saurian farm, he would be baking bread on a Saurian farm. He asked to care for hatchlings, so he cares for hatchlings. A senior counselor leaned forward, and if more of them are among us, doing other quiet things. Then they are doing quiet things, Myra said gently. That is what we promised them and what they earned. Humanity does not take its promises back from its own. The chamber was silent. In the end, the council did not punish Vira 9. They did not remove Daniel. They issued a formal statement that the bond between the hatchlings and the human caretaker would be honored under ancient law. They also issued, very quietly, an invitation. Any retired member of Ghostwork who wished a Saurian post would be received with open claws. The invitation was never publicly answered. But 2 seasons later, a small bakery opened in a Saurian harbor town, run by a man who had grown up on Mars and made very good bread. On Vira 9, life simply went on. Sela learned to fly on a windy afternoon in her 7th month. She launched herself from the rafter of the nursery, flapped wildly, crashed into a hay pile, climbed out shaking straw from her silver wings, and looked at Daniel with an expression that very clearly said, "Did you see that?" Daniel, who had been laughing so hard he had to sit down, said yes. He had seen that and she was very brave, and could she please try not to land on his head next time? Torin learned to fly 2 weeks later. His first flight ended on Drak's roof. Drak, who had grown a little softer over the years without ever quite admitting it, climbed up the ladder himself to bring the small bronze dragon down. He carried Torin back to the nursery with one large clawed hand cupped under his belly, muttering the whole way about how the bronze ones were always the troublesome ones, and how someone really ought to teach them better. Daniel, listening from the doorway, did not point out that Drac was, in fact, that someone now. Years passed. The two hatchlings grew. By their 5th year they were the size of large horses. By their 10th they were as long as small ships. Their scales darkened and brightened in turn, silver going to white gold, bronze going to deep burnished copper. They were beautiful and strong, and they could have lived anywhere in the sanctuary, in the great open ridges where the older dragons slept. They never did. Every night, both of them returned to the long stone hall that had once been the nursery, where a small human still lived in a small set of rooms at the back. Sela curled around the outside of the building like a silver wall. Torin slept across the wide front step. Their breathing was slow and warm and shook the moss tiles gently, like a deep tide. Daniel grew old in those rooms. His hair turned gray, then white. His hands, the small warm hands the Bobbies had first known, grew thin and spotted. He walked more slowly. He sat longer in the sun. The Saurian children of the sanctuary came to know him as the soft-spoken human who told them stories on the steps and never raised his voice, not even at the worst-behaved hatchling. None of them ever learned what he had been before. None of them needed to. On the night he passed, he was sitting in his old chair by the window, with a cup of tea cooling on the sill and a book open in his lap. Sela and Torin felt it before anyone else did. They both went very still. Then they both went very quiet. For 7 days, neither of them moved from the small hall. On the 8th day, they flew up to the high ridge for the first time in a long while, and they roared, both of them together, in the deep, slow voice of grown dragons calling for one who would not call back. The sound rolled across the valley and was heard for many miles, and the Saurian wardens who heard it lowered their heads. In the years that followed, no statue was raised, no song was written. The conquered did not put his name on any list. Humanity did not ask them to. But on Vira 9, every Saurian child grew up knowing one quiet truth. The deadliest warrior humanity had ever made spent the last years of his life humming small lullabies to baby dragons, and he chose that ending himself, and that was the kind of strength the stars should learn to fear most. And on warm evenings, when the wind was right, 2 great dragons could still be seen sleeping side by side at the door of an empty hall, peaceful as they had been on their very first night.